The mass shooting in Minneapolis has predictably, but of course sadly, continued to divide all of us as we piece through the puzzle of what went wrong in this case. And I want to start just by putting up this reaction from California Governor Gavin Newsom, who posted, "We cannot even make it through the first week of school without mass shootings, and the GOP will continue to do absolutely nothing while our kids are being gunned down. This is sick." That's from Newsom. Echoed comments made by Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, who said at a press briefing after the shooting that this is not, quote, just about thoughts and prayers. Can go ahead and roll that clip here.
Every one of us needs to be wrapping our arms around these families, giving them every ounce that we can muster. These were Minneapolis families. These were American families. And the amount of pain that they are suffering right now is extraordinary. And don't just say this is about thoughts and prayers right now. These kids were literally praying. It was the first week of school. They were in a church.
Elsewhere on ABC News, a reporter referred to, quote, the name of President Trump being written on the guns. This was in a video uploaded by the shooter before the shooting took place that said Donald Trump. So the reporter, we'll just watch the clip and then break it down, but says Donald Trump's name was written on the guns.
23-year-old Robin Westman was able to leave what police called a video manifesto that they're now going through to try and establish motive. We've also been going through it and can tell you there are crude diagrams of the church. There are also photos of the weapons, and they include all sorts of writings, the names of past mass shooters, criticism of Israel, the name of President Trump written on the guns. There are also racial slurs, nihilistic statements, all painting the picture of a disturbed individual who carried out this mass shooting.
So if you didn't see the video that the shooter uploaded and you're relying on ABC News, as many people are doing, or reporters who have seen the video, if you're relying on them to relay the information, you may come away from that with the belief that this was a fan of Donald Trump. So whether that was accidental or not, it's a significant error from ABC News in this case. And the reaction this is always how the reaction goes to these mass shootings. They're so deeply painful for everybody to have to think about during news cycles, and of course get politicized. I personally don't have any problem with the politicization, so long as it's not cynical of these events, because when something goes wrong, of course, the politics, of course, we all see politics as the avenue to correct problems in our society. Now, if you are waging partisan wars, and I think, many people do that, I'm tempted to say that's what Gavin Newsom is doing, but if you're a sincere opponent of, or let's say you're a sincere proponent of gun control, then of course you look at an event like this, and I don't blame anybody, as somebody who's mostly on the other side of that issue, you look at an event like this and you say, this is Republicans' fault, because if we had gun control, people like the shooter in this case would not have access to guns. Now, we're still learning the particulars of how this shooter ended up with guns. The shooter was 23 years old, died at the scene. We're going to get into that in just a moment. But we don't know exactly what happened in this case. Most 23-year-olds in America without felony histories are able to get their hands on firearms. And so what the proper gun control reform or gun reform would look like that would have prevented this case, while also allowing people access to their Second Amendment constitutional right without changing the Constitution. Again, If you want to change the Constitution, I disagree with it, but that is in the Constitution right now. It is part of the Second Amendment. That is something we have in this country that doesn't exist in other countries. It is what makes our gun culture different. So I get it. I understand frustration if that's your perspective, that, obviously the fewer guns, the fewer people have access to guns, the fewer mass shootings end up happening. Putting my own cards on the table, I think the one commonality you see with every single mass shooting, I actually think the gun control argument probably makes more sense for violence in inner cities, and sadly for people who choose to end their own lives. There's there's not insignificant evidence in the case that people who have guns in their home, the propensity of those people to then use those guns in ways that can put them in danger. Again, like, that's not insignificant. But let's just, again, look at this particular case. We still don't know the full facts of the matter. But I think what you see very clearly is wild mental illness. You see the social safety net failing. And I don't mean the government social safety net. I mean the safety net of parents and community members who should see somebody very clearly mentally disturbed. This was obviously the case in the Uvalde situation. It was the case in the Parkland situation. And in that case, actually, the government safety net did fail too, because there were tips given to the FBI, I believe at the time, that if they had been properly followed up, would have prevented this. So that is, if you are mentally ill and you want to commit an atrocity like this, whether or not guns are hard to get or easy to get, you are probably going to commit a mass atrocity one way or the other. Now, Zed Jelani has published, this was years ago actually, Zed, who's been on the show, published an interesting report on a study that did find pretty significant evidence of copycats and the copycat phenomenon when it comes to mass shootings. And this is very tragically appears to be an example of how powerful these sort of cultural images are for younger people who grew up post-Columbine and are mentally unwell and sort of seduced by the lore, especially if they're deep in online spaces, which, again, if you are in a healthy family environment and a strong community, you are less likely to be in that position in the first place because, people who love you are looking out for you and are properly alerted to your state and concerned. And we're still learning in this case the extent to which that was or was not true. But that is generally something that you can point to in every single mass shooting, is that there was something wrong at home, something deeply wrong at home. And the safety net failed to catch that. A lot of these mass shootings are not done for like clear political reasons, though they have political motivations. What seems to be much more powerful than the politics. And I would, love to know what was going on with the would-be Trump assassin, because I think that's actually one of the cases where there's more evidence that it was clear politics, and not, a Reagan would-be assassination attempt where you think you're trying to get Jodie Foster's attention or something like that, or a Columbine situation where there's just a deep unwellness that creates a tragic perfect storm. And so far in this case, I think that's very clearly what we're looking at. And so let's just dive into this a little bit when it comes to Robin Westman. I don't like using shooters' names, but in this case, I think it's just going to be inevitable because this is one of those where Westman, we're already seeing way more headlines about Westman than about the two little kids who were killed while they were praying at Mass. They were 8 years old and 10 years old. 17 people were injured in this case, many of whom were children, a few of whom were elderly. So we're seeing way more about Westman. And, if you're an editor at a publication, and as much as I read the New York Post and rely on the New York Post in a lot of different ways, I think they have a really bad history of covering mass shootings. And I've said this many times about the Post. It's not just the Post. I think the Post is one of the worst offenders, but the way that they cover shooters makes me deeply uncomfortable, partially because of what we were just talking about with Zed, in that it is so it's treated as such a subject of intrigue, and it is, but I think in a way that creates a media we've seen for years now, right, since Columbine, that just putting these images of the manifestos and the videos out there over and over again there's something, I think, that is the cost-benefit analysis to that. Like, you can link to it, but plastering social media with these images from your articles day after day, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I find that to be unhelpful and not worth the sort of media benefit. If people want to see it, you can link to it, you can do anything like that, but just it gets to a point where it's excessive. That's my take. But in this case, Robin Westman, 23 years old, grew up. Robert Westman seems to have sought a name change. Their court documents from Westman's mom, who actually worked at Annunciation in Minneapolis. This is the church where they were doing a back-to-school mass, 8:30 in the morning. Westman comes in with several guns. I think initially fires through a window, is apprehended, or is killed by self-inflicted gunshot wound in the back of the church. So this is an Annunciation in Minneapolis where Westman's mom previously worked. Westman's mom, when I think Westman was 17, petitioned to change Robert's name to Robin. And that's where actually a lot of times people on the right who are uncomfortable with the politicization of tragedies like this, actually some people are being perfectly consistent and saying, well, we're going to politicize it, people on the right, because those who are sort of given or are sort of walked down this path of having their gender identity affirmed as a treatment for clear dysphoria, that may have been something that contributed to Westman's decline or spiral and ended up in this moment. So let's just get some of this out on the table as to whether or not Westman had transitioned fully, whatever that is. So the Post writes that Westman applied to change his birth name from Robert to Robin in Dakota County, Minnesota, when he was 17 years old, according to court documents. That name change was granted in January 2020. The petition added that Westman, quote, identifies as a female and wants her name to reflect that identification. Now, though, in a manifesto that was posted on YouTube by Westman before the shooting, you can see Westman writing out, I don't want to dress girly all the time, but I guess sometimes I really like it. I know I am not a woman, but I definitely don't feel like a man. And then also, quote, I wish I never brainwashed myself. I only kept the long hair because it is pretty much my last shred of being trans. I am tired of being trans. I wish I never brainwashed myself. That is Westman in the manifesto that the Post, so the manifesto is absolutely wild. And in a good act of journalism by the Post, they went and translated what appeared to be a personal code that Westman was scribbling in this manifesto. And the Post found a way to translate it. And so this is, I would say, a pretty clear-cut case of gender dysphoria. So did Westman medically transition? It doesn't appear to be the case at this point, but it does appear to be the case that Westman was struggling with a pretty clear-cut case of gender dysphoria and had the dysphoric gender affirmed by his mother, by the state, and was still struggling with that immensely. After going through it as a teenager, and then at the age of 23, still struggling with it immensely. and putting that into the manifesto that is posted ahead of the shooting. So that's why I say politics are part of a shooter's motivations, but not always the whole story, the primary culprit. And I would say that was true even in the case of congressman being shot at the congressional baseball game practice. Many people probably remember that. Outside of Washington, D.C., a crazed Bernie Sanders fan was out there and had been, you're talking about healthcare and all of that. I don't blame Bernie Sanders for that. And it's sort of a different case. I think we all use overheated rhetoric. And I think that's sadly part of our politics right now. And you're out there saying Republicans are literally killing people, Democrats are literally killing people. Nobody really wants to kill people. For the most part, are there genuinely evil people like Westman? Actually, yes. But these stories are just sometimes, well, I shouldn't say sometimes, every time, the media conversation about them ends up, either being black or white. You fall into one category or the other, when it's probably more appropriate in a case like this one, where Westman's politics were completely all over the map in the video. They're absolutely wild. There's stuff about on the guns in particular. If you go watch this video, which if you have the stomach for it, watch the video. But if you don't, it's 11 minutes long. It's extremely chilling. You can hear Westman sort of rustling these bullets. Westman is pretty clearly a gun fanatic. Shows a picture of Jesus Christ at the head of a target at one point. Just disgusting. Writes things like, "Where is your God now?" on these magazines. All kinds of weird stuff, like "suck on this," "for the children." I'm actually like literally watching it as I'm talking and scrolling through some of the messages on the guns. There's some stuff on it about Israel. It's just a complete mess of different messages, names of other shooters written on the gun, other mass shooters written on the guns, I should say. Just a "kill Trump now." I'm literally reading the guns from the videos as I scroll through this. So it's just a complete mess, and we're still learning more about this. It's a really sad video to watch. Someone that clearly needed help. And I get a lot of people's frustrations, by the way, with the media, because this is a clear act of anti-Christian violence. These are kids that were killed at mass. This is a mass shooting at a Catholic mass. The shooter posted a video ahead of it with a picture of Jesus on a gun target, at the top of a gun target, and had "Where is your God now?" written on the magazine. So this is a shooting that happened in a church. I mean, to the extent that we can say there was a clear, let's say, category of violence that this would fall into, it's very obviously an act of anti-Christian violence when you have a video with Jesus at the head of a target and "Where is your God now?" written on the magazines. "Israel must fall," "release the list." These are other things that are written on the guns. It's very, very strange, but I think we can say with some confidence that what Jacob Fry said about thoughts and prayers, if this had been a shooting at a mosque or a synagogue, where deeply faithful Muslims or Jews had been targeted, I don't know that he would have come out right away and said that so boldly. Because prayer is important to people, and I think that makes the world a better place. I'm obviously a Christian, so that's where I come from. But even Republicans who don't support gun control, and this is just why the bad faith attacks and the media coverage of this are frustrating. even Republicans who don't support gun control, do not believe that the only way to deal with mass shootings is prayer. Many Republicans believe in gun control reforms. They're just ones that Democrats think fall short. Also agree that steps should be taken, heightened security in churches, heightened security at schools with doors locked. You may think that that is noxious because it is insufficient and the problem is obviously guns. But it's a different position from what Fry said, which is that, quote, this is just about. It isn't just about thoughts and prayers. So he's representing the position of the right in this case as being, quote, just about thoughts and prayers. And that's a straw man, and it's not true, and it's an unnecessary cheap jab at prayer after people of faith were just targeted at a Catholic mass. So I think we know that this would be treated differently if it were not a Catholic church, sadly, if it were not a Christian congregation, sadly. I've heard so little in the media about the face of Christ being on a gun target that was posted in this YouTube video. But that's where, with these shootings, I look at the media coverage is one layer of it, and often there's a frustration with double standards in the media. But those double standards in the media don't, for example, mean that it's always wrong to, quote, politicize a mass shooting. It's wrong to cynically politicize a mass shooting. It's wrong to, use it just for the sake of politics, to mine it for political wins, to mine the pain and suffering of others just for political wins. That's obviously wrong. But media double standards don't mean that Bernie Sanders, for example, is responsible for the shootings at the congressional baseball game that seriously injured, almost killed Steve Scalise at the time. So you can be frustrated with the double standard, and then I think still the right course of action. In a case where it's not like Crooks, there's a lot of information we're learning in this case about Robin Westman, and it may be appropriate to politicize it and to say that affirming gender dysphoria in this case ended up sending this young man down the path that ended on what happened Wednesday. We're going to learn more information, and Westman, the other thing I think is worth mentioning, Westman's parents divorced in 2013. Westman obviously targeted a school where his mom had previously worked. I know some people have brought up the fact that Westman talked about in the manifesto feeling like he had poisoned his body by vaping, had worked at a cannabis dispensary over the last year. There are all kinds of factors that play into these things, and Westman's politics don't appear to be completely clear-cut. They appear to be a reflection of insanity. And that is so often the case. That's probably the best way to put it, is that the politics don't seem to reflect a clear R or D, conservative or liberal. They reflect insanity. And again, that is the case so often. And so often, almost always, the case is that there's something deeply wrong at home, and that a community that should have been there, that should have been protecting those kids from this insane individual had lapsed in one way or another. Maybe it's the family, maybe it's other caretakers. Westman was obviously not a child. So that's what I'm particularly curious about going forward, because we're not going to get rid of guns in the United States of America. We're not going to get rid of guns in the whole world. There's the dark web. I mean, there are all kinds of ways for people to get their hands on, whether it's arson, whether it's like Boston bombing, pressure cooker type devices. People who want to commit mass atrocities will do it, whether they have guns or not. We see this in Europe. That isn't in and of itself isn't an argument against gun control, but it is an argument that in these mass shooting cases where you have clear-cut insanity, people who want to commit these acts of violence, A, might be inspired by the media lore that follows the people who came before them, and B, could be caught in a healthy society by the community, the family safety net that surrounds them, and C, if they want to hurt a lot of people, they're going to find a way to do it. They're going to find a way to do it. And I think that's what's especially depressing about these conversations and these incidents. So long thoughts today, but it's such a complicated story. And I just, like many people, like almost everyone, I think we're all frustrated with the conversations that happen after these awful, awful incidents. And on so many different layers. There's the media, there's the politics, there's the double standards, there's the copycats. There are no really easy answers to this, although some people may disagree and say it's gun control, but it's not an easy conversation to have. It's a frustrating one, and it's always like a tangled knot, and you're trying to pull at the threads to untangle it. And that's definitely how I feel in this case. So thanks for going slow with me on this one, because that's, I think, the right instinct in these cases. It's not to say that there won't be fair political conclusions to draw from it at some point. I don't have them right now. I think there are indications that there are some in the right direction. I think it's pretty fair to say that the media has treated this with a double standard, but we're still learning more about what actually happened here. So appreciate you tuning in. As a reminder, it's super helpful if you subscribe here. You subscribe, whether it's YouTube or your podcasting, your favorite podcasting platform, and over at undercurrents.tv, where you get the full premium experience of the show. We'll see you back here with more soon.